Here with the Naples Daily News Editorial Board to talk with Steve Teuber, who's running for a seat on the Lee County School Board. We want to welcome you, Steve.
Thank you.
Could you start us out here for the first couple of minutes and fill us in for those who aren't familiar with you about your background?
Yes, good morning, and thank you for having me here today. I became involved in the school board in 2002, back when I was the operations director of Paul AeroPower. We were the largest manufacturer in Lee County. At the time, we didn't have a very strong, comprehensive plan for alternative education. Kids that weren't going to college, what we were going to do with those kids. In particular, I had about $1 million worth of equipment to give to the school district. All they had to do was give me a vocational plan. They didn't do that. I ended up sending that equipment to China, and about $1 million worth of equipment. So I got involved with the school district and ran for school board in 2002 and was actually served on the board from 2002 to 2010. During those 8 years, we accomplished a lot of great things. We became the pilot program for the state of Florida. We put in 3 comprehensive high schools in Lee County, which are Ida Baker, South, and Lee, which now teach a lot of the vocational programs, our auto mechanics, robotics, nursing, carpentry. And I want to continue with that because as of reason right now, East Lee County, their construction building, even though it's a huge facility, it's not even being used for its intended purposes. So during that time, over those 8 years, we saw demonstrative improvement year over year, every year. When we had the big boom of people coming in, we still improved. When we had the bust and everybody had problems with the foreclosures, we still improved. So across 8 years, we saw continuous improvement. And that was because we had a focused plan, a strategic plan we adopted in 2002 and moved our district forward. In 2008, we became an A district. We maintained our A district until I left in 2010. When I left in 2010, 85% of our schools were A and B schools. We had no failing schools. 4 years later, we now have 42% of our schools are either C, D, or F schools, and we have 9 failing schools. We have dropped from an A district, we dropped as low as a C district, and we now have a host of problems in our district, both for capital and our operating budget and as far as our academic plan. The strategic plan that we developed in 2010, they simply put on the shelf and have been kind of running without a direction. And it's evident by some of the problems that we're facing, today. When I came in 2002, we had, if you recall, we had lost our SREF certifications in most of our schools, and we were paying people $17 an hour to actually walk the hallways with radios so that we could actually attend school. And we were spending $17,000 a day to have firewalkers in our halls. We had no preventive maintenance plan. It was just chaos. We had 880 portables across the district because they hadn't taken any planning as far as to build schools. So when we came in 2002, we did the largest comprehensive construction plan in the history of Lee County. We built and extended, because we had no land in our land bank, we actually expanded every school that could be expanded, and we reduced our 880, and of those 880 portables, all of them were leased, so the taxpayer was paying lease rates for these portables. We eliminated all the portables. We actually purchased a good host of some of our portables for when we had further expansions, and we got ourselves back on the operating fiscal responsibility. We are now in the same similar crisis after 4 years of misdirection in our district, that we now are busting at our seams over the last 2 years. Rather than having any plans of building schools and making capital improvements to allow us to do that, they've just continued to add children in our classrooms. We now have kids busting at the seams in our classrooms. My daughter's in a STEM class in 8th grade at Diplomat Middle, and she actually has 36 students in a high-tech classroom. It's just, and you wonder why our grades are so poor across our district. It's because we have too many kids in those high-intensive courses that need to have more plans. The problem is, over the last 4 years, this board has taken a lot, because the state has enabled it, they can do it, taken a lot of the capital money and moved it from capital to operating, and we are now just over budgeted as far as how much administrative cost, and continuing the exponential growth of the downtown offices of administrators. We have executive directors now that have 1 or 2 direct reports of other directors underneath them, and we have just such a overinflated administrative debacle downtown that we don't have our money in our classrooms. So
Are those some of the reasons on your website you talk about how you're distraught and there's a lack of trust in the district? Are the things you're articulating here, is that what you mean by those?
Exactly. What I'm trying to do is get back on the board, to get our community back focused on education, back focused on our children, to get our spending back into our classroom, to reduce the bloat that is downtown and take the money and put it into the classrooms, and to use my business experience. You know, I've had 25 years in business. I'm a degreed engineer, but I have an MBA in operations. I'm a certified business manager, and to use some of those business skills on the board to work with a board that will work together collectively to get a strategic plan in place to move our district forward in an efficient manner, to be able to put the money in the classrooms, build the proper schools where they're needed, and to be able to focus ourselves back on education.
Are you able to quantify how much money that could be going to capital is instead going to operating? Is it?
Well, this board, and it's, I can't quantify here without the direct numbers, but they've rated our reserves $50 million a year over the last 2 years. There is a state law that allows them to transfer money from their capital budget to our operating, and I believe it's up to $50 million that they're actually moving from our capital budget.
Is $50 million not really going towards excess administrators, is it?
Yes, it is.
That much?
Well, I mean, exactly.
That much administration and put that back into construction?
No, I'm sorry. The question you said is, are we spending that much more excess administration? I don't know the answer is how much is bloated. I do know that when the Burke administration came in 2002, or in 2010, they increased the downtown administrative staff by about 15 or 20% of excess people. When Dr. Graham's administration came in, they grew it even bigger. And they're doing it with such ambivalence. For example, last week, they attempted to add another position as an assistant to our wellness program. It was a $53,000 job. It wasn't approved in the organizational structure, so it was another job, another position even outside of the approved organizational structure. The money was going to be rated from the insurance trust fund, which is a trust fund for insurance purposes for the task force. They were going to raid that for $53,000. But what they didn't, and they were actually not even putting it through, Superintendent Graham did not even put it through on a superintendent's recommendation, but tried to sneak it through in the consent agenda so he'd add one other position. The problem is that $53,000 is a reoccurring expense. So how are you going to fund it the next year and the subsequent year and the subsequent year if they're just trying to rate it from a non-recurring revenue source to fund that position? So those are the type of the things that just defy reason and defy proper business management, that it wasn't properly briefed, it wasn't properly appropriated, it wasn't approved in the organizational structure. And that happens all across this district, from these last 4 years. So the amount of money that can be scaled back, I don't know until I'd be able to actually take a look at the budget and work with our fellow board members to actually analyze what spending could be returned. But there's a bunch.
Enough to build enough schools to fix the classroom situation you're talking about? Not
enough to build the schools that we need. Currently, the projections that we need right now, we have to build a high school in the south almost immediately. As a matter of fact, that issue has been pressing for the last year, and our administrative staff has told this board we have to make a decision, and they've continued to just ignore it. They've focused all this attention on this whole opt-out debacle and taken away focus from issues that really need to be addressed. If we don't start breaking ground by June of next year, which means the plans have to be approved within the next the next 2 months, we're not going to be able to make that timeline, and there'll be nowhere to put these high school kids in the south.
These problems that you're spelling out here, where do you lay the blame on that? Do you lay that on the superintendents that have been in office, or do you lay that on the board members that have been in office?
I really don't like to lay blame on anybody, in the sense that, it is what it is and we have to move forward. I will say that over the last 4 years, this board has displayed absolutely zero leadership. It's been a divisive board, a 3-2 board, with 3 of the board members, the ones that were elected in 2010, controlling the direction of the district for the last 4 years. The 2 that were on the minority have made a lot of common sense arguments, but they again were on the minority side, and there was never that colloquial and that collaborative work of the 5 to actually share the ideas amongst the 5 people. The 3 that were controlling the board provided no direction to Dr. Burke. And so I think that was part of the problem. I don't think Dr. Burke had the experience or the leadership skills to be able to direct the district. Dr. Graham came in with a district in chaos, and to this point, this board has failed to give her any direction. And so, to me, I think it's part of it that the superintendent needs to step up and say, hey, I need direction. You guys got to tell me where to go. But I think it's incumbent on the board to lead the district. That's, to set policy and lead the district is the duty of the school board.
So with the new member coming in, and if the election goes your way, how would you go about changing it, and what would you address first?
Well, I'm really encouraged by the current composition of the board. As you know, Mr. Scott was deceased, but he was not going to rerun anyway. And so Ms. La Riviera that took that position is a very intelligent, insightful woman, and I've had a lot of conversations and work with her over the last several months. The existing board members, Jeannie Dozier and Kathleen Morgan, also have a lot of experience and good, insightful communication, and I've worked with them as well. And I've also started working with Mary Fisher. So I see that this board could be a very good collaborative working board to be able to move forward, and I think that we could actually get some direction established to put our district in the right direction again.
How do you make up for the time lost in terms of planning and capital?
It's going to be very, very difficult. We're going to start in the hole in November when the new board gets seated. Regardless of what the composition is, they're going to have the work cut out for them. Immediately, we have to take the plan on the construction path. We have to take a look at our preventive maintenance programs, which have been completely decimated. Some of the problems that people don't realize, it's going to get worse before it gets better, because preventive maintenance is a cost that, if you don't understand that it's better to pay a little bit now than to pay a whole lot later when you have water egress into a building or a chiller fails during school and those emergency costs. But unfortunately, it's easy to cut preventive maintenance costs because, again, you can take that money and use it elsewhere, and you don't see the benefit if you don't have that managerial experience, which the board, the three that were running the board, didn't have that experience. So we're going to have to actually, make some cuts and do some things that may not be pleasant to the population as a whole, because it's going to have to get ourselves back on track. So there's going to have to be some tough decisions made to get us back moving forward.
You mentioned the opt-out debacle. Can you just expound on that a little bit?
Well, it's funny that in 2004, with No Child Left Behind, Jeb Bush put in the state of Florida, the FCAT, and the standardized testing tied to high-stakes testing. So that issue's been prevalent since 2004, so for 10 years. So this board has had 3.5 years to address it, and they never did. But surprisingly, 60 days before the general election, it becomes a hot button, and it hits all the emotions to stir up the community. So the reason why I call it a debacle is I think it's a problem. I think to have our testing tied to one test to determine whether or not a child matriculates to the next grade or graduates, I think that is a problem that needs to be addressed. But I don't believe that it had to happen in a knee-jerk reaction with no plan in place, and then to put 85,000 children at jeopardy by just saying we're not going to obey the law. So I think that what they should have done years prior, when they first started, if it was that big of an issue, and to be able to get that to happen, was to work with legislatures, to work with our boards. Fortunately, after the Mary Fisher actually got some good advice and good counsel, she withdrew her support, and it went back to a status quo that allowed the board to work in a very decisive and concrete manner with a plan. And I applaud, Kathleen Morgan, Jeannie Dozier, Mary Fisher, and the superintendent all drove over together to the West Palm Beach consortium. We belong to a board, to a group that has 11 school districts that are basically all of the districts from Charlotte County all the way down the coast, all the way up to Indian River, that are primarily the donor communities. In other words, we pay for the students across the state, because there's donor communities and there's receiving communities. North of I-4, most of them take the taxpayer monies that we do in Collier and Lee, primarily West Palm, and fund it for the rest of the state. So that group has a lot of political influence, and it also comprises 42% of the student population in the state of Florida. So when that group comes together in a unified way, they can make changes in the legislature. And that group voted unanimously to take this issue up to the legislature in March. So now you have momentum and you have a base upon which you can work to come up with a solution that the legislatures can actually put into law, that the school districts can actually help develop and move us forward in a pragmatic and meaningful way.
The buzzwords seem to be high stakes testing and over testing, and the FCAT would be the high stakes test, one test to whether you pass the grade or not. But over testing, a lot of that seems to fall on the local district. The district just putting tests on to measure this, measure that, for sometimes not even student performance, but for the school's performance, to see how the school's doing. How do you address that? Seems like more of a local issue. How do you go about
that? That is a local issue. You know, when I came in 2002, we had a whole bunch of problems. First off, in the district, the size that we are, we had textbooks that were different across every school. So across the hall from each other, you would have a shortage of books on one side and a surplus of books on the other side. And the exact same course. It was the exact same course. And what was even more problematic is they were taught in different sequences. So with a 60% mobility rate in Lee County, if you had children that moved from one class to another in a different school or even in the same school, you could learn the exact same material 2 different semesters because of the progression of the textbook. So what we did in 2002 is we took all the schools and said, give us your best in every subject matter. So the best math teachers of the entire district got together and we said, pick the top 3 books. They picked the top 3 books and they went to the schools and said, of these top 3, which is your favorite? Everybody voted. The #1 vote getter became the district school book, period. Now you didn't have surpluses and shortages, but you had the same book across the district. We did that with every subject matter across the district, 2.5 years. We then did an academic plan. And we had all the top teachers make an academic plan, and it was on the internet, and it was available to everybody. So everybody taught from the same academic plan. They still did their own course lessons, so the teachers were still allowed to teach, but everybody followed the exact same academic profile. So if you moved from Estero to Lehigh, you were within a day or 2 of what you were learning in the previous school. The next step that we were doing now we have to test. You have to have accountability across the district to find out where you sit, because there is best practices. So we have the teachers create the test, and again, they all decide what's going to be tested, but everybody tests the same. And the reason why that's important is, you look at University of Hawaii, they say, we're a great football team, we're undefeated. They play the WAC conference. When they go in the SEC and they end up getting, pummeled by the team, the worst SEC team, you understand that there's disparity. If you have the same test across the district, and we had a pinnacle system that we put into place, a software system that would allow us to see which schools are doing best, and now we can actually use best practices and actually share those technology and the best practices amongst our district. We had purchased a testing module to do that in 2010, and we're just beginning to implement that district-wide. And the new administration came in, and they got rid of all of it, and they got rid of the academic plan, and that was the start of the decline. So I think what we need to do is go back to having our district decide, and again, not the state decide what we test, but have our district decide what we test and to figure out how we go forward. I don't have a problem as well. And again, excessive testing can be curbed at that point because, again, our local people decide the test. Our administration, by the guidance of our school board, determines what's excessive and what's not. Then again, as far as the high stakes testing, I still think we need to do a test, a nationally certified, national standardized test, which the FCAT wasn't, by the way, whether it be the Stanford 9 or the New York Series test, or there's so many of them out there, the Iowa test, there's so many out there. But pick one that gives us an indicator, so we just get a constant check of where we are compared to everybody else in the nation. But use it as an analysis tool and not determinative as far as the success or failure of our children.
The new test that's rolling out to replace the FCAT, do you think that that's essentially going to be perpetuating the same problem?
I think it's going to be even worse. And the reason why is, if you think about any type of a standardized system, and then people talk about Common Core or Florida standards, and it really doesn't matter which one you use. Think of it as a 4-train train. First, you have the standards that you want to learn. Second is you have to have how you're going to teach the standards. Third is how you're going to evaluate the standards. And fourth is how you're going to evaluate the teachers that did the first 3. Well, we're already deciding that the train 4 is already at the station. The teachers are going to be evaluated on a mechanism, which is train 3, that hasn't even been invented yet, on a curriculum that hasn't even been developed yet, on a standard that hasn't really been embraced by our district. So we've got to train in a whole bunch, in a really a different format. I think the best thing to do, the state is so anxious and so set on having some type of accountability or standards, because I think they're trying to justify the jobs at DOE. I think everybody needs to just take to stop, and the reporting mechanisms to the state, until they figure it out, I don't think you should be having teachers held accountable to that level until you validate the process. I don't think it's fair to the students, and I don't think it's fair to the teachers, particularly when the last system was proved to be faulty, because we were evaluating teachers with a 60% mobility rate. You were evaluating teachers, so the teachers started with 10 students. At the end of the year, 6 of those students weren't even under her auspice and control. They were somewhere else in the district, yet she was still being measured by those students that are no longer even in her classroom. How can that be fair? So that's the things we need to address, is figure out how are we going to bring that to a local-based control, and it's actually reasonable for our teachers and our students locally.
You talked a little bit about how the new board would move forward. What's your feeling about expanding the board to 7 members?
I'm kind of mixed there. I'm glad it's left to the people. I think the pros are that you do have a very large district, and to allow 7 board members would allow more input, and it would also help prevent what happened over the last 4 years, that you get 3 people that want to have a controlling interest that can move the district. It's a lot harder to have 4 votes when you're not making sense or having any type of strategy. Mm-hmm. So I think that would help prevent what happened these last 4 years. Conversely, it's an added cost. It's about another $250,000 of taxpayer money. Seeing the effectiveness of the Cape Coral board, where it's hard to get, when you have a school district, I keep telling people, they talk about term limits in the county commission or the school board. Our school board, people are getting paid $40,000 to do that job. To me, I think that's wrong. I think it either should be nothing or it should be substantially more. I can't advocate substantially more because I don't like to raise taxes. So, to me, I think that the school board should be a servant. I think they should pay for your expenses, but I don't think it should be a salaried position. I'm doing it because I don't need a job. I'm doing it because I'm trying to help the community. And I think if you had, so the people like myself would continue to run, but I think it would eliminate a lot of people that are just looking for a retired job and really aren't doing it for the right reasons. So, and I'm afraid that when you go 5 to 7, you're going to just perpetuate that. You're going to have people doing it for the wrong reasons. So I would encourage it to go to 7 members, but it to be paid similar like a state representative, $12,000 a year or less, so that people are actually doing it for the right reasons. The other issue that I have with single member districts, that when it goes to 5 to 7, we actually change 5 of our districts to single member, is that you create fiefdoms, that you see that prevalent in Miami-Dade, that people are doing things for their schools and not doing it for our school system as a whole. And we need to do things for every student in Lee County, and being district-wide, you're responsible to every student. But again, on the converse side, the problem, especially now with absentee ballot voting, it becomes almost impossible for somebody to run against an incumbent with a district-wide, because our district is so big and it takes so much money. For example, to get the word out, to be able to explain what I'm trying to do for Lee County, and to explain, my goals in Lee County, it would take $50,000 or $100,000 to mail a mailer out to everybody district-wide. So it becomes very cost prohibitive for somebody that really wants to do things for the right reasons to run a district-wide ballot. So I'm really torn both ways as far as which way to do it. I think I trust our voters, and however they decide to move forward, I'm sure we can make it work.
You mentioned your employment with the aerospace company. Could you just expand a little bit on your professional background?
Yes, I went to General Motors Institute, and so I worked as a cooperative student through GM. Spent 8 years with General Motors and 8 years with Ford Motor Company. Left Ford Motor Company to pursue a law degree. Came back when I left Michigan. I moved down to Florida. I went back to industry, and I took over Furon Corporation here in town, and I ran that for 5 years. And then I moved to Paul AeroPower, and I ran that company for 5 years. So I have extensive manufacturing background. I obtained my MBA during that process. became Black Belt Sigma certified and a certified business manager. So a lot of my positions have been in the executive role. I've served on many boards throughout that tenure, so I understand the position of a board member, but also to understand the complexities of a 1.5, $1.6 billion budget. It's a very complex issue. More importantly, though, is also the ability to understand that everything we do is constrained by categoricals that are dictated by the state of Florida. So you have to have the ability to be able to go to Tallahassee and speak with legislators to be able to make a point to change some of the rules that we have and the restrictions that we have up in Tallahassee. I think I was very effective during my 8 years on the school board to work with our legislative delegation here locally and also statewide up in Tallahassee to make some important changes. One of those, to be example, is when I came in 2002, they got rid of the weighted funding. That's the reason why we don't have shop in middle schools anymore. They didn't feel it was important. And they were just getting ready to move the weighted funding out of high schools. And instead, I worked up in Tallahassee quite fervently with this board as a support, and Garrett Richter here from locally down here, and Mike Bennett from Sarasota, and we actually got that killed so they didn't take away that restricted funding, but also got Lee County to be the pilot school to do our comprehensive high schools. I want to continue that and build that even more because, again, we are focusing trying to get all our kids on college ready, where the truth of the matter is only 1 out of every 4 of our students actually go to college, and of the ones that go, only half finish. So we have to continue to work on plans to get other alternatives in our schools. And to do that is to get some cooperative joint ventures going with some of our businesses to actually get Explorer posts to the Boy Scouts or activities in the businesses where kids can actually understand what goes on in all these different trades and all the different opportunities, and to get them hooked into what they so they see a focus that high school actually provides them with a skill that they can use that may not be going to college, but gets them a skill so they can actually go out in the workplace and be productive.
In terms of managing the charter school applications that have come in over the last 4 years since you've been off the board, how do you feel the district's done with the charter schools?
Well, our charter schools, there's 2 different issues that we have in Lake County. We have our charter school in the Cape Coral, which is our city charter school, but we have right now currently have 24 charter schools for profit. And that issue, really, this board didn't do a bad job because they really can't. The way the legislature set it up is it's actually an appointed board that approves, that sits over the auspice of the charter school system, and we have statutorily, we can either approve or disapprove based upon statutory restrictions. If they follow the guidelines of the state and they meet all those restrictions, if we don't approve it, they'll just appeal it to an appointed board and we get overturned and look silly. So basically the school board, even though it's supposed to be under our control, auspice and control, it's really not. It's statutorily empowered, and it's really governed by a board that's appointed by the governor.
Is that something that a school board member might lobby the legislature to get changed, or is it not worth the effort? Or?
I don't know if it's that structure. I think it's it's kind of trying to fight City Hall. I think more importantly, what's important is to try to get the restrictions. They're allowed to build schools in a certain way, which is a lot more cost effective. Even the charter school, city charter school, built on the commercial code, not the SREF code that we were built on. It costs us $55 million to build a high school because and $25 million for elementary, because we're required to do certain things based on the SREF code. Miami has been brazen enough to say we're not doing it. I don't really like that approach, but I appreciate their effort. But to go to the legislature and say, look, we don't need to have a closet for every 2 rooms. Right now, if you go to our elementary schools, you'll find a lot of wasted space that we spent taxpayer money to build, that's not effectively using our schools. So I think that would be a very worthwhile effort to be going to our legislature and say, look, this is what we need to change, and this is why. And I believe they'd be receptive to it because, again, it was put in there for a reason. But if people can't justify the reason, I think it's worth being changed.
Half an hour goes by fast. We're a little over 29 minutes now. Are there any final thoughts, anything we haven't covered that you want to get over?
You can see my material. I believe I'm the most qualified to be in this position, but more importantly, I believe that if you look at the at the track record. You know, when I came in 2002, the things I said I would do across the 8 years happened. When I left in 2010, I was defeated on a transportation budget and a school choice budget. I have a solution for school choice that includes parental involvement, which I can tell you about. But there is changes that need to be made. But the promises that were made in 2010, school choice hasn't been changed in 4 years, or even attempted to be changed. So nothing was even brought up on the board. Transportation costs, even though gas prices were at a premium in 2010 or 2009 when the calculations were made, gas prices are actually cheaper now. Transportation costs are up 17%. So we've increased 11% for the number of students budgeted, but we're still 6% higher year over year between now and from 2010. So the candidate currently in the position has done nothing. So I think if the taxpayers want to get their best bang for the buck, I'm hoping that they will look at our performances, look at what we've done, and give me the opportunity to serve 4 more years to turn our district around.